Guys, we've been talking about this video for a while, and I've done some that touched on this in a couple of different places. But I want to go into something I think is important, and it's very educational, and it actually fills in a lot of history gaps going back, 20,000 years, and really much further than that. I know that that will throw some Bible people off because they think, we're 6 or 7,000 years old. But that's just this time span, and it's actually about double that, because when you're talking about the days of creation, the first day, a day with the Lord is 1,000 years with man. So each of those days, guys, and this is biblical, each of those days was 1,000-year period. This happened on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. And God looked and he needed someone to take care of the animals. And that was called what many would say the sixth-day creation, the first man. And there's a difference if you study between Adam and Ahadam, the man. Anyway, then they saw it was good. God saw it was good, and he rested for another day. 7,000 years. That's just since the beginning of Genesis. But Genesis does not, and it fools a lot of people because my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, that can't read and translate just a little bit on something that important. But God rested that seventh day. He saw it was all good. But then when was the man created? On the 8th day. Think about it. Let's read that for a moment. Now, I'm not going to do any preaching on this, I promise. I just want to give a little bit of preface here to why we're going to go back in time and why it may make sense to some people that think we're 6,000 years old. Anyway, we wouldn't even have dinosaurs were not even mentioned in the Bible. So that tells you that was an earth age before the earth age that we have now. Anyway, this is software that's free on our website. It's called eSword. I think you can get a more advanced version of it maybe for a few dollars a month. And it works on some phones. I'm not sure if it works on all. I use it on my PC, have for years. And if you look at eSword.net or .net over on bpearthwatch.com, you can download this. The beauty of it is it's based on the King James, but it has many of you know this, but y'all bear with me. It has numbers assigned to these words. And in the Old Testament, they start with an H because of Hebrew. If you go through the same software, you get to the New Testament, it will have a G, then a number because of Greek. It will all say G, but some of it was Aramaic, but just to keep it simple. And so this will help you. If I'm not fluent in Hebrew, but I know how to look up the meanings, and I have some Bibles that have them side-by-side versions, and if you read them long enough, you can start to pull out words and meanings. But anyway, you don't have to do that to use this. Genesis 1, just hang in there. It says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, you also have read about it was really created without blemish. It was perfect. But, and the earth was without form and void. And so the same Kenite translators that lied to you about what happened in the garden are lying to you here in their translations. The word was is not in Hebrew there. The earth became without form and void. All you got to do is click on this number. It's a Hebrew word. It's called, let me go back, called Haya. It may be hard to read. I can't get this part any larger. But it's a primitive root to exist. That is, be or became, come to pass. It does not mean it was without form, it became without form. So it's very important not to be one of the ones that are destroyed and taken away from knowledge for lack of knowledge, okay? Don't do that. Study to show yourself approved. And because the Old Testament tells us it is the glory of our Father to hide a matter, but the honor of kings to search it out. Not verbatim, but you know the one I'm talking about. Anyway, the earth became without form and void, and darkness and was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And what I'm talking about here, guys, is it was destroyed the first time, more than likely for the same reason that it was destroyed during Noah's flood. Now, there's many flood stories around the world, and there's many other destruction stories that really are not necessarily about floods. We're going to go through a couple of those. Now, many of you have read Genesis, and you read right through that, and I did for years until maybe 45 years ago or something, when we started getting some of the, like the Strong's Concordance or the Hebrew and Greek information in there, and then start listening to some very good teachers. But Genesis 3, I'm not going to make this a biblical preaching video, but the Bible is history. It's the history of God's people. And so, but it doesn't begin in Genesis. That is the beginning of this age. Again, what happened to the dinosaurs? That was the age before. But people were there also. There's been footprints found here in the U.S. under layers of rock that shows men walking 5 toes in the path where dinosaur tracks are that are much bigger than theirs. And a lot of other information like that, guys. It's there if you want to look it up. While we're here, though, I'm going to go to Genesis 3 just for a second. Guys, then if I didn't mention it in the first part, let me back up just a second simply about the tools here. I've got it. This is King James right there. You can make it smaller. You can make it bigger. And then King James, the button right here with a plus on it, guys, gives you the numbers, okay? So it's easier to read through until you find a part that you're concerned about, or you just want to read it the correct way. But it takes much longer. But I'm going to turn it off for just a second. And we're talking about the serpent, who was Satan and father of the Kenites, father of Cain, by the way. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, You shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die. It was all about tricking them into, first of all, getting kicked out of paradise. And then the destruction of God's creation from that point on, by interference in the DNA and the torture of men coming out of Rome all the way up into the New Testament. But when we get to the part to where our Father steps in, and he says, And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself, Adam told him. And he said, Who told thee thou was naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree? God already knew. Whereof I had commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat. And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. Now, you got to understand, Eve had twins. Cain and Abel were brothers by the same mother. But if you understand the human body, a woman can have babies from different fathers, twins from different fathers. Think about it. Anyway, if you want to do a deep dive, that's what the thing about the garden was. It wasn't about an apple. And we're going to read a little further here. It was about the destruction of God's creation, because Satan cannot create life. He can manipulate it, but he cannot create it. And he's always jealous and hated anything that our Father did, especially after our Father realized he was a creep and kicked his butt out of heaven with 1/3 of the angels, by the way. And the Lord said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. Now, if you go past the King James into these newfangled Bibles, I'm not talking about some of the original texts. I'm talking about, you know the ones I'm talking about. Stay with the King James. Simply, not that it's is the most accurate of all of them, except for the fact that it is the closest to the original translations. It's been translated wrong. It's been manipulated. Books have been taken out. But it's the closest as far as the Hebrew and Greek translations. And we're right here, Eve in Genesis 3:13 is saying the serpent beguiled me. Sometimes it will say different words, trick me, deceive me. And what that was is the Kenite scribes that scribed all this out in the end and translated, that were sons of Cain, they hid the words that hid their father and the destruction that he caused in the first earth age. But here, if it says, if the woman says the devil or Satan or the serpent tricked or deceived me or any other word than beguiled, throw that thing back on the shelf or give it away to somebody that is going to put it on the shelf anyway, because it's basically useless because you cannot go back to these first translations of their Hebrew word. And the serpent beguiled me has nothing to, it was a trick and it was a deception, but what was it? And this is why our Father cursed Satan above all, and cursed him above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. Satan has regretted and hated everything since he got kicked out. He couldn't run it. He wanted to overthrow it, and God said, no, you're fired. Anyway, let's go back and kick this King James plus button on right here, right there. And let's find 3:13. Again, it scatters it out a little bit. And the woman replied when the Lord said, what have thou done? And the woman said, let's keep it again in the Hebrew translations, or the ability to translate it to the Hebrew. She said, the serpent beguiled me. Remember? But let's look at the Hebrew word 5377. It's a word called nashal. Nashal is how it's pronounced, N-A-W-S-A-W. It's a primitive root to lead astray, that is, to delude or to seduce. And that's what he did. That's why that was the split. That was the purpose that Satan had, to divide the children of God from the children of Satan. Again, through Cain, he continued the line of Satan. He couldn't create life unless he seduced Eve. And that's why the word is to seduce. It has to do with sex, not an apple. You got to grow up and realize where we're at. If you don't understand the beginning, guys, you won't understand the end. And we're approaching that. So it may be something that keeps you from fainting, because you'd realize the earth has been here much longer than 6,000 years. And the other things that are coming upon it. Now, guys, I'm recording this in my studio, but I'm going to do it live so we can chat on the right with it. And I'll probably throw in, if I can get it finished this afternoon, I think I can, some of the hurricane updates and radar, things like that. And again, I really enjoy it because we get to chat, and it seems like after we do the marathons, YouTube can get quite boring. Anyway, I like doing it anyway. But what you're looking at is an artist illustrations of North American Ice Age and the mastodon there. And it's called the Younger Dryas. They estimate it, and they do ice cores, and they can tell the age of things. But 12,900 years ago until 11,600 years ago, that it lasted 1,300 years. And we're going to go into detail about what happened leading up to that point in a couple of different directions. But again, the North American continent, guys, during the Ice Age, which lasted before the Younger Dryas, about 75,000 years. And there's events and ice cores and things, a volcanic ash deposit, actual energetic solar particles that were trapped in different ways in the Earth, and radioisotopes, different things like that. And there's all the technologies there. I have no reason to deceive you at all. And we're going to look at some of that. And I have it in this particular presentation, but it would take 3 hours if I went into detail. When I get it cleaned up, I may provide the PDF if you want to do that. Anyway, again, 1,300 years ago, 12,900 to 11,600 years ago, or for 1,300 years, the Younger Dryas occurred. But it was after a breakout of the Ice Age. Something happened, and then the Earth went back to cooling, and then another thing happened, and now we're in the temperature zones we are now. But this time the Earth will be destroyed by fire, not ice, and the entire Earth was not destroyed. During that 1,300 years, the people around the planet had been warned for what was coming, that there would be good years to prepare and to store up for you, your family, and your livestock before an ancient and deadly winter was coming that would last 1,300 years. People heeded it just like Noah did building the ark, and has a lot to do with Göbekli Tepe. But we'll mention that, but we're going to focus on Derinkuyu and the people that got the message and did exactly what they were told and survived it, and how they did it and where they did it. And Derinkuyu, by the way, guys, we're talking about information that's super important, was not discovered until the year 1963. It's not ancient knowledge. It was then, but it was lost forever. And it's a city underground in Turkey, and they found hundreds more. That Derinkuyu happened to hold 20,000 people. Let's look at that a moment. Now, in your polar caps, both the Arctic and Antarctic, you have places that really never melt completely. But you know, the average temperature in the Antarctic, or some of the really cold, is about minus 60 degrees Celsius, and it's half that in the Arctic. But you have a much larger continent, you have more land mass, and it just stays colder. The Antarctic has an average temperature of around minus 60 on the cold sections. Again, it's doubled of what's on the Arctic. But what you're looking at in this chart, we won't dwell on it very long, is about 124,000 years of information that's basically coming out in our generation, because the ability to drill down for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years in these ice cores. Now, something happened right here 124,000.8 years ago, and this is kiloyears, or in thousands. So we're up to basically, when they say on these charts, if you look at some of the scientific data, they'll say present date. That stops at about 1950, but it puts us in the present age, okay? But it got very cold, and this is a 75,000 year period, and it continued to get cold. Now, something happened here 19.6 thousand years ago. Comes up into this area right here, and from that point to 12,000 years, we had a rapid warming. Then we had a dip back into the Younger Dryas, and we're going to take a look at that. But just to let you, the North American continent was not inhabitable on the surface for 75,000 years. It was a different Earth age. This planet is millions of years old, guys. We just have this much history. Now, I want to focus on this, but I wanted to show you the first chart because it doesn't show this pre-warming period going back to the 75,000 years. Last glacier maximum is what this means. It went through the Pleistocene. You had another drop in temperature. We saw that in that chart called the Heinrich event. Then we had what was called the Bowling-Allrod event, guys. Very important. It was a sudden heating point that got us almost to where we are now. See the chart over here? This is BP, not for me, but before present day zero, which is about 1950, if I'm not mistaken, looking at a lot of different scientific information. But what we want to focus on first is, why did it get this hot? Now, everyone's heard of the Younger Dryas and that period of time and the vents that broke that up, and that's why it led to where we're at now. And it was broken up this last time in here by comet strikes into the North American and the other northern continents around the planet, brought us out of the Younger Dryas. This time it's held in the heating zone for about, 10,000, 58,000 years before the present age, okay? Not before BC, but before present age. Now, when you see these charts, a lot of people will skip right over to the Younger Dryas because there's more information there. This sudden cooling event froze the woolly mammoths. When they were found, they still had fresh flowers in them. And the name Younger Dryas, by the way, if I remember correctly, the Dryas comes from the name of the flower that was in that area growing on the planet in those days and the one they found in their mouth. It has it's another Latin name, something Dryas or Dryas something. I can't remember, but that's where that name comes from, is from a flower. Now, you had another dip in the cold temperatures about 8.2 thousand years ago, and then going through the Holocene period up to about 1950. But they didn't know for a long time why the sudden rise. So let's take a quick look at that before we go into the Younger Dryas and why the ancient cities were built underground, the reason we're here, why all of that was done. But let's look at the bowling all rod and see what happens, because there's technology now that show that. Now, they did research in the ice cores in Greenland. That's where they found this first evidence of the Younger Dryas, from the ice cores taken from what they're calling European maritime environments dating to the late Pleistocene. The ice cores show that the warming process produced abrupt wholesale melting of the last glaciers. Now that was, guys, right here. Now this is aged thousands of years ago. But this does not include, or that includes the 2,000 years since BC. What happened right here? We know that comets, we've got a lot of evidence of what brought us out of this. But what brought us out here, and then the Earth tried to go back to its cooling section. Something else happened. God, our Father, was ready to bring the Earth back to where it could be inhabited on a much wider scale than just in the warm zones. There were few. But on the right, you're looking at what is called melt glass, chromite, monazite, things like that. But it was a 12,000-year-old Younger Dryas boundary layer called the YDB, was a layer where they found the information in the ice cores. And it contains a peak abundance, this boundary layer, of what's called melt glass. It can only be formed at a minimum of 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Right here, this heating point. It was found in the Younger Dryas boundary layers. What brought us up to that point? Again, the Earth tried to rebalance from that, and then the events of the comets brought us back to where we are now. But this peak, guys, is very interesting because it took a while for them to figure that out. They found the melt glass at an incredible temperature, and you realize at 2,400 degrees, guys, why the statues were burnt in Egypt, why they crumbled, why sides of monuments all over the planet were burned. Granite statues in Egypt were burned at this point. That's how old Egypt is, not as young as many people. The pyramids and those statues are not as young as many people think. They weren't built by the so-called Egyptians that we know now. It was a different race, probably some of the people we talk about that created giants, people like that. But again, what happened there that would form these melt glass balls you see on the right that would cause the temperatures on our planet to hit 2,400 degrees? Let's take a look. Now, guys, be patient with me. I've got to put some background, or I've got to put some type of foundation to what we're going to talk about. We're getting to Derinkuyu, believe me, that's the best part. But without this information, it still leaves too many gaps. But they're talking about 12,350 years BC. So you got to add a couple more thousand, right, to get you up near that 15,000 year mark, which is an approximate mark of the reason that we hit 2,400 degrees on the surface of our planet. Now, they're showing different things here that happen, different amounts of radiocarbon data and all. But right here in this chart, maybe a little hard to see, but this goes back to 12,350 years BC, and these are extreme solar events. Guys, the event we call the Carrington event was powerful, but it's not even on the chart. Okay, look at the dates. It's not even on the chart. This thing was the only thing going back almost 15,000 years ago that came up to this impact point, and it was a solar blast. It said it was caused by the record-strong extreme solar storm. You don't think our Father can shut this down with heat? My God, think about that. 12,350 BC, record-strong extreme solar storm. Why does God has put it in our minds in the last dozen or so years to really keep up with what's happening on the sun and that fourth angel? But again, you can look at different events that occurred in the pink triangles here and the amount of sunspot numbers over here in the green that year. They didn't have that sunspot number going back that far, but through the radiocarbon data and these ice melts, or glass melts, the event happened right here, 2,400, over 2,400 degrees, right there, solar storm. Now y'all want to get to the good part? Now let's look at Turkey, guys. This is the tip of the island right here of Cyprus, and so you know the Middle East right here is Jerusalem's just south of this area. But Göbekli Tepe, which is in the circle here, is a little different from these four cities and Midyar that we see also in Turkey. By the way, all the churches of Revelation were in Turkey. They weren't in Israel or Jerusalem. Anywhere in that area, they were in Turkey. And anyway, Göbekli Tepe was discovered first. Derinkuyu was just 1963. But Göbekli Tepe, guys, was, to me, it had a lot of animal statues and all. That's going to be a different video. But to me, that is where some of the gathering points of when the people in these underground cities, and there's more, and Göbekli Tepe has many underground chambers going way out from what you see above ground in those circles. It was to gather the animals for this destruction that was coming and to having a place for them. And that was also done in Derinkuyu and all. And guys, some of these places were maybe even used after Noah's flood, which a lot of this is going to really tie in together before all of history is said and done. But Göbekli Tepe is the one with the circles, with the columns, and they're talking about the comet strikes, and you see all the animal. It almost looks like a zoo because of the markings. There was not really much written language during those times except for cuneiform, and it wasn't a language. It was simply an alphabet. Many languages were written in cuneiform, but they had, again, it wasn't a language. It was an alphabet used for those different languages, done in clay. Let's go to Derinkuyu, and we're going to talk about a few of these other cities. Very important information, very interesting to me, and I hope it is to you guys too. Now, this is one of the highest quality maps of the people that have went down into Derinkuyu. It's about 20 stories deep, and mapped it out. This is one of the best. Now, in this particular picture, for some reason, my mistake, I cropped out the very bottom because it shows a water table just right under this area here, to where they could dip down into these areas. These are people and animals, dip down through these chambers, going up and down, and get water, much like a modern day well. Notice it may be a little hard to see, but this says this is a high-quality map of Derinkuyu, an ancient underground city that was formed in Turkey. It is 60 meters deep, 200 feet, 20 stories, and could shelter up to 20,000 people. It was discovered when a Turkish resident found a mysterious room behind a wall in his home in 1963. The Lord said all things would be discovered. He wasn't talking about just spiritual things, but history of our planet that would lead to us to dive deeper. Again, it is the glory of our Father to hide a thing, but the honor of kings to search it out. To the lowest depths and the highest highs, not verbatim, so don't accuse me of that. But I want you to notice something here. In these top chambers, it's not, you probably on the phone you're not going to see it, but you see some livestock and some gathering in these areas up here with people, dropping the grain and stuff into these holes. This depicts what led up to the 1,300 years underground. They were told this was coming, an evil winter, to store. You're going to their God. They call their God. You've seen his depiction many times. I'll show it to you. He told them. He told one of them, kind of like Moses was told, to tell his people, or to build the ark and prepare. They were also, they were told they would have years of good harvest before this evil winter came, and to prepare. The ones that listened survived. The ones that didn't are no longer with us. Those tribes are gone. But some of these cities were occupied up until, if I'm not mistaken, after World War II, and there were some swaps of nations here, of people that lived in these places. But not all of them. But this one was not discovered until 1963. Now, I want you to notice you got your chambers that go down to the water table. Trust me, they're there. And imagine being down in one of these locations. Now, the different stories in here, they look like maybe 9 or 10, but it was deep enough for 200 feet. Most buildings, 10-foot ceilings, you got 200 stories. So imagine down to the bottom here, a 20-story building. Well, imagine being in one of the chambers that led. Notice all of the chambers where people lived. Eventually, they would lead into one of these vertical chambers going up and down to let air out, let a little light in, and to let, if you notice in the cases of the livestock, why were they in the top? Well, it's very sensible to let that odor out at the top, not at the bottom, or the entire area would be filled with the smell of it. That's why they were here. I'm going to show you pictures before this is over, actual photographs. But imagine being down in one of these areas where you could look, maybe here, up through these chambers and see the cave walls coming into this air chamber and water chamber. There's a photograph of it, guys. Let's take a look at that. Now, this is from deep within. You can see some lights going there, and I can't read the sign. It's for, tourists and things like that when the people are allowed to go there for researchers. But you're looking up into the sky, and it's much larger than it appears here. If you pay attention to it, it almost looks like an ant hive or ant bed that you see the way Derinkuyu was built. But these are the chambers that come out at different areas that I showed you, coming into these light and water chambers where you could dip down in and get there. Now, it's interesting if you think about it, and how far do you have to go down to a cave, guys, to stabilize the temperature, no matter if it's wintertime or summertime? It'll stay steady at a certain temperature to where you could survive it if you had to. Now, the top was pretty cold, but they had abilities to close all of these shafts off also in case of floods or any other thing. And I think they were used in modern times. And when they were first discovered, let me back up a few thousand years, probably maybe 12 or 13,000 years, people thought that these were to hide from both Persian and Roman invaders. That when they first discovered, that's what they thought they were. Then they found out they were much older. And then I've seen all of this, and then I wanted to know what was going on. Why were they told? And we didn't really even know if they were told to do it. But if you think about it, how would they have had time to dig a 20-story building underground with something happening immediately? Without a warning. How would Noah have known to build the ark without a warning? Now, I'm going to show you some pictures, other pictures of this area and some of the other cities, and then I'm going to show you what this was written in cuneiform and I think the oldest known writings. There's a reason all of this is being discovered, and it's fascinating, and it's wonderful that our Father has shared this with us, and that the people were taken care of for many generations, going back thousands and thousands of years. Now let's look at some of the larger chambers in Derinkuyu itself. This leads to an outlet for light. It looks like there's possibly one to the right of this chamber. More than likely a large gathering place, possibly burials. If the deceased were not taken to the surface, we know we had livestock, but look at this. It's like a huge cathedral. Remember, 20,000 people could be here. They were told to get here. Let's take a look at that. Now, also Derinkuyu, you guys, notice the step carved out. Notice the rolling stone, just like the sepulcher in Jerusalem. You roll a stone over the door. Like I said, they could stop the heat or the cold. You could stop a lot of water. And in the latter days, where they said, and probably did, seal out the Romans and the Persians. You could only open these stone doors from the inside, not the outside. Invaders couldn't get to the edges of them to move them. On the inside, it was very simple. But again, you can see the lights in there where they've added like some, Carlsbad Cavern or something, which is a very interesting tie to some of this in the North American continent. That's a different video, but again, Derinkuyu. Notice the similarity in the structure again of what we see in Jerusalem, in that area, and it's not very far from here. All of it looks to be created very much in the same periods of time. Now, not only the timing, but the architecture, and it was copied. We had the sepulchres in Jerusalem and holy cities and all of that, and the stone was rolled away. But that technology, that was widespread. The Persian Empire was very large, the largest in the world at one time. Again, then after that came the Greeks or Romans, and then Rome basically, with their religion, destroyed, and they attempted to destroy the Christian religion, and they pretty much did it if you're not careful. And we'll get into that. That's a different video too. But let's look at a couple of other things. Again, this is the last one of Derinkuyu, but I want to point out a couple of things. They've lit it up and all for the tourists and things like that. But notice it's the deepest underground city of Cappadocia. Biblical name, right? It all ties together. All of it does. Deepest underground city. There are others, but look at this. They are at 20 stories deep. I think it's only about 9 or 10 actual floors, but the depth of it creates, you have higher ceilings, you have more walls left in place, guys, to support the higher ceilings, things like that. But let's look at some of the other cities that they're discovering in that area, and then we're going to look at the oldest known writings about why this occurred and who told them to do it. Now, let's go back to our map just a moment. Now, Midyar is basically, it was originally discovered as a big section of caves and things like that. I think that it may have been some more excavation on it. I'm not sure about it. But let's go over here to, this is Kamakli, Nevashir, and Azkanak. But let's just take a look at a couple of pictures of these cities before we go to the ancient script. Now notice at the top, this is Kamakli, the underground city, the one next up in the line above Derinkuyu. Same architecture. Look at the rolling stone to block the door and the different lighting. And this one is above it, not as large, not as deep, and some of them were started in the top of mountains that worked their way underground, and some went sideways much further. But again, this one is called Kamakli. Again, exact architecture, and it just tells you how populous the area of Turkey was in that day and time. And you're basically talking about Iran, the Persians, and how widely their influence was spread across the world at that point, or across that part of the world at that point in time. This city, and a couple of others we're going to look at it were all built at about the same time for the same reason. So they had much more people to put underground to save them from the evil winter than they even thought about when we first started discovering it. Now, we'll say this. Notice this marking under the rolling stone here door. Looks like it was concreted in, possibly for safety, and also so that it could not be closed from the inside, because it would be hard to get back in. You had to do a lot of work. Anyway, this is the next city up in the line. Now, these go back very old in time, but new civilizations have built on top of them, just like we've seen all over the world, right? But this is what the next city up called Nevashir, the Nevashir Underground City, hillside complex with a church. And I saw, and you can barely see it here, I don't have that image anymore, but there's a ancient fortress there. But this is the top of it, and this would be the place maybe as the ice was melting after 1,300 years, or the chambers that would go above the levels of the ice and snow to where they could still get fresh air in and go and let it back out. And it wouldn't make sense to have it this high initially if you were hiding from enemies, right? They weren't. They were trying to survive. But you can tell by some of the architecture. It's been occupied by the Persians way before any other generation, way before what we know as the Turkish people. Iran and the Persians had all of this area, including much of the Middle East, further south. Now, briefly, this is real brief, but we're talking about underground cities and people surviving, nations, civilizations. And this is called talking about the ant people of the Hopi. Many of you read about it, going back into, if you understand who they were, you read it in the ancient Sumerian. And we talked about it, Rex Bear and I talked about it on about a 2-hour seminar with one of the Hopi leaders, Brother Martin, from there, just outside the Phoenix area, up around in the White Tank area. We were discussing some of the things we had saw, but he got into this discussion about the ant people when I asked him about who the Spider Woman was in the Sumerian text. Anyway, the Hopi Indians were led, in the Sumerian text, it was by a female that was called the Spider Woman even then. And in the Sumerian lineage, Spider Woman was a scientist, an expert in DNA and other things. Anyway, the Brother Martin told us that they were led, the Hopi people, to the areas of the mesas, and they were taken underground. I'm not reading this right here. I'm remembering, I will, but I'm remembering what he told Rex Bear and myself. And he told us they were led underground for a very long time because things were coming on the planet that they could not survive in Arizona. And in Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, the Four Corner area. Nobody in the nation, anywhere in that longitude, latitude area, was going to survive what was coming. And he said they lived there a long time. And one thing he mentioned that's not mentioned very often, and that's why this word to ear handing down of ancient knowledge is so key. He said the one thing that happened, that when the Hopi people came out, they had been changed. The ant people, which were very narrow people, they weren't ants, they were very similar to the very tall king that was in Egypt with a very long head. Anyway, that describes them, much maybe smaller, but the people pretty well, the ant people. But was it because of the lack of sunshine and the lack of being on the surface for 1,300 years that would have changed the Hopi? Or was there some mingling of DNA during that period of time? Here's something interesting about this. It says the Hopi Indians had lived on the high deserts of northern Arizona for thousands of years. This barren but beautiful landscape was the place where Hopi gods directed them to build a number of villages called the pueblos, what we today would call stone apartment complexes. Here the Hopi managed to flourish by simply growing corn, beans, and squash with very little rainfall and almost no irrigation. Guys, there's so many modern videos of how the Hopis do this on YouTube now. It's very fascinating. One of the most intriguing Hopi legends involves the ant people, who were crucial to the survival of the Hopi, not just once but twice. The so-called First World, we talked about that, or World Age, was apparently destroyed by fire, possibly some sort of volcanism or asteroid strike or coronal mass ejection. They named it right there at the end, coronal mass ejection from the sun. The Second World was destroyed by the Ice Age. Ice Age glaciers or a pole shift. During these two global cataclysms, the virtuous members of the Hopi tribe were guided by an odd-shaped cloud during the day and a moving star at night. It was a moving object, all right, and it goes back to the ancient Sumerians and very high technology. But they would call it, just like in Mexico, the sky gods. Again, during these two global catalysms, and Brother Murray that taught from the Shepherd's Chapel in Gravette, Arkansas, he left us in 2014, I think. He talked about the three Earth ages, and you can go and I have the originals on cassette, and I think you can get them now in CD form. It talks about the three Earth ages, and he uses biblical references. Very good. He also uses Hebrew and Greek references also. But it says, during these two cataclysms, the virtuous members of the Hopi tribe were guided by an odd-shaped cloud during the day and a moving star at night that led them to the sky god named Sotuk Nang, who finally took them to the ant people. In Hopi, Anu Sanon, Anunnaki. The ant people then escorted the Hopi into subterranean caves where they found refuge and sustenance. Again, Anu Sanon. Guys, it's one big circle. Anu, the Anunnaki. Anu was the sky god. He was also called Sahira Mazda of the ancient Sumerians. You've seen him in what we've called the Anunnaki skyship many times. Let's take a look at that a little closer now. Again, Anu, they call him, I think, Sahidra Mazda, just like the car. And what they've done is you can see what we've always called the Anunnaki skyship. The landing gear, their father Anu in it. And on this particular image, these words, they're three different languages, but they've been translated to good deeds and good words right there. Anyway, this guy told what would be called in our modern terms, I guess, he told Noah to build these underground cities, but it wasn't Noah. It was a fellow named Yima. And he told him what was coming, how to prepare, just like the ark was prepared and built, and what to do. But again, this was who told the Iranians in Turkey what was coming and how to survive it. The knowledge was passed around the planet. Because if you go to even the Enlil Enki story, one god was tired of the human race, wanted it destroyed. Flood was coming. The other god wanted to preserve the human race. He liked it. That is the battle that has gone on since Cain killed Abel because of the hatred between the two races. Because one was the synagogue and the people of Satan, the children, and the other were the children of our Father in heaven. It all ties together, and it's very simple if you take a look at it and take time to study. Now let's talk about that transcript and the information that was passed down. Now this is just an excerpt. We're going to read a lot more of it than this, but it's an excerpt, and it goes to the very heart of the matter. But again, Mazda or Anu told Yima, that would be in the vein of a Noah, O Yima, towards the sacred land will rush evil as a severe fatal winter. Evil will rush as thick snowflakes falling in increased depth. It continued. The ice caps in North America were over a mile high. Think about that. But this is the oldest, as far as I know, the oldest known writing on the planet. God preserved it so we would understand what we're finding at the end time. Again, it was written in cuneiform on clay tablets. But let's look at the translation. Now let's read directly from it. I put in some parts myself, but I'll tell you the parts that I put in. But the top, we're starting directly from the text. And this is Mazda or Anu telling Yima. On the material world, the fatal winters are going to fall. They shall bring the fierce fall or foul frost upon the material world with the fatal winters, and they're going to fall. They shall make snowflakes fall, again translated, thick, even as deep as the highest top of the mountains. And all the three sorts of beasts shall perish, those that live in the wilderness, those that live on the top of the mountains, and those that live in the bosom of the dale, under the shelter of the stables. Now, these mountains on the top of the mountains getting destroyed is also in North American legend having to deal with the Algonquin Indians. I've done that many times talking about the Carolina Bays. Same time period, exactly same time period. Again, before that winter, those fields will bear plenty of grass for cattle. Now, with floods that stream, with snows that melt, everything's normal. It will seem a happy land in the world, the land wherein footprints even of sheep may still be seen up until that winter. He's giving a warning. Right now, you've got good fields, you've got plenty of grass, you've got floods that stream and flood the streams and keep your fields watered. You have snow that melts from the mountains and waters them, and you drink it. That's about to change. Prepare. Therefore make thee a Vara, V-A-R-A, long as a riding ground on every side of the square, to be an abode for men. A Vare long as a riding ground on every side of the square, to be a fold for flocks. You need a big area, okay? So in the blue, I looked up the word Vara. The phrase, make thee a Vara, appears in ancient texts, particularly in the Avesta, and refers to the creation of a Vara enclosed or an enclosure to serve in his abode for people and animals. In essence, it instructs someone to build a protective and living space, often a fortified area, as part of a larger story or narrative. The term Vara is often associated with King Yima, also called Yamshid in the Zoroastrian writings, some of the oldest there are. This is what we're talking about. That is ancient Iran, who was tasked with creating such an enclosure to preserve life and prosperity. Again, he was told, these days are coming. We're going to the Enlil Enki narrative. One side wanted the people destroyed, one side wanted them preserved. Going back to the garden, Satan wanted God's children destroyed while his children lived, or to destroy everything, burn it all down, since he couldn't have it anyway. But God didn't let that happen. Our Father didn't. That's for a different video. But guys, I wanted to come here and take a look at a couple of things. And again, this is going to be live. If I cut in with some reports through this, it will be live and looking at some hurricane information. Let me just continue 3 more verses from that section, page 70, verse 20. And this is the Vesta. It's a very long book. Thither thou shalt bring the seeds of men and women. Again, guys, let me stop here a minute. That's going to Noah, right? Also to the ancient technology of seed banks. Noah, there was no way Noah got all the animals on the planet, 2 of each kind and all, in a boat. Okay? Some, more than likely, he did. But in the people that the Hopi called, or the lady the Hopi people called the Spider Woman, she was a DNA specialist going back to these same times. She was a scientific queen. Anyway, you can read about that. But bringing the seeds of men and women, of the greatest, best, and finest kinds of the earth, thither thou shalt bring the seeds of every kind of cattle, of the greatest, best, and finest of the earth. Thither thou shalt bring the seeds of every kind of tree, of the greatest, best, and finest kinds of the earth. Thither thou shalt bring the seeds of every kind of fruit, the fullest of food, and sweetest odor. All those seeds shalt thou bring, two of every kind, to be kept inexhaustible there, so long as those men shall stay in the Vera. Think about that. And so, again, all of this history is tying together. He said in the largest part of the place he made 9 streets. Now, Derinkuyu, if you look very closely, is about 9 levels out of the 200-foot depth. 6 in the middle, 3 in the smallest, 2 to the streets of the largest part. He brought 1,000 seeds of men and women to the streets of the middle part, 600, to the streets of the smallest part, 300. We're talking about live people, live animals, and DNA seed banks. You think these were cave people? Only not until they had to dig one to survive. There was ancient technology on the surface, including going back to Atlantis and the great nations, including Iran. Continues, it said, that Vera he sealed up with a golden ring, and he made a door and a window self-shining within. O maker of the material world, thy Holy One, this is Yima again, the Noah, basically, thy Holy One. And he called Mazda the maker of the material world, the creator of all things, and that was particularly called El or Elyon in the original description in the very old text, by the way. It says, again, Yima's asking, what lights are there to give light in the Vera which Yima made? And Ahura Mazda, again, Anu, answered, said, there are uncreated lights and created lights. There are the stars, the moon, and the sun, and only once a year seem to rise and set, and yet a year seems only a day. Think about that. Now, what is he talking about? There's uncreated lights and created lights. Now, you've got the stars and the moon and all of that, but how could you have light inside? I mean, you'd have torches and things like that. But do you know in some of the ice caves in ancient Antarctica, they've discovered light that comes from bioluminescent creatures, just like when you stir up the ocean at night and you see the plankton glow, or you see a firefly glow? That growing would account for a lot of light in some of the areas. But that's very interesting that there is a capability of having light in such an underground situation. But again, the descriptions are here, the details, just like Noah was told how to build the big ark. The details on that. It was very high technology. And you think about the Turkish area above this is Mount Ararat. Supposedly, we think the ark landed. And that's very interesting, too, because they found a marker in looking in the areas of Derinkuyu and Göbekli Tepe that has the names of 3 of Noah's sons. And it talks about they are the builders of the new nations and the survivors. And they were builders and architects. It was not cavemen. But when this was wiped out, he was wiping out. Our Father wiped out knowledge, too, so we wouldn't go straight back into the evil creations and technology of atomic weapons and things like CERN right off the bat. Maybe give it some time to grow and mature a little bit and hoping for a better ending. Hadn't worked out too good so far, has it? But for us that endure to the end, the same shall be saved in the New Testament. By the way, the Greek word for saved is kept safe. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. We've almost went an hour without the breaks if I throw in some hurricane stuff. I promised this for a long time, and again, I've mentioned part of it before, but the last time I talked about it, we did not have the information about the ending of the first 75,000 years of the Ice Age, that 2,500 degree section where we're seeing the glass melts. Think about that. But it's all being exposed in the end time. Again, Derinkuyu wasn't discovered until 1963. We're watching it, guys. Look for more of these. I've got about 10 probably put up on the shelves that I can pull out into PDF form and do something with. But a lot's going on, and it takes a lot of time to do them. And as you get my age, your mind doesn't work quite as good as it used to. But I appreciate you guys bearing with me. It's a heads up. Be safe.